to the cloud.
Oh, wait.
You okay?
Well, I see something on slide 3 that's blocking the name of the course.
I think it's, if I fixed it. Yeah.
You fixed it. Okay.
Yep. All right, so let me go to full screen and see if you see the screen okay?
That's good. Yep,
Can
it's
I
good.
see the screen okay? All
Uh-huh.
right, so we are at, keeping a little bit of time here, 3:09, perfect. All right, so we start in 3, 2. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Beyond the Now. The future of successful facilities is in the 3 Ws. Today, we are here. My name is Tomas Eliasson, design principal with Little Diversified Architectural Consulting. I've been practicing architecture for 23 years as a design principal, designing schools, K-12, as well as higher ed, with a strong emphasis on the future of learning and also in high performance design. And today with me is Tracy Stewart.
Yes, my name is Tracy Stewart, as he said, and I'm a principal at CMTA Engineers, and I've been in the construction industry for almost 30 years now. And I've really spent the focus of my career on high performance, energy efficiency strategies. I'm a WELL AP as well as having my MBA, because being able to achieve these high performance buildings, you really have to understand the financial metrics behind it. And so today we're going to be having a presentation that is an AIA accredited course. So if you are taking this and want to receive those, please let A4LE know, and we can get you your certificates for the AIA course number provided here. This is just some of the general information we need to provide you as part of an AIA course. The course description you did receive already with the learning objectives. And so we're going to go ahead and just get started in the content. And thank you.
Yep. So learning objectives, first we would like to touch on explaining how wellness can elevate the student's outcome. Second part of the presentation will be about demonstrating how successfully implementing high performance and resiliency can impact your school districts and your schools. Third, we identify the life cycle cost and ROIs as a third win. And then we'll end it up with a master move. It's a case study of New York City Academy in Osceola County Schools in Florida, where we'll talk about the synergies of wellness, sustainability, and cost within that project and how we brought it all together. So at the heart of this presentation, we really are trying to touch on this concept of the master move, which is kind of this space that lies between wellness, high performance, and ROI in the design of learning environments in schools. First, we want to touch a little bit on wellness. And our goal, our target is to truly augment the student experience. And that's a way to help students increase their learning objectives under a kind of a wellness environment, and find ways of elevating the student performance through a process and through the environment in which that happens. The way we look at this is through 4 quadrants, and kind of with the mindset of learning for the imagination and innovation economy for the future, really. And when we think about this, we have these 4 quadrants of how students learn for tomorrow, the role of technology in that process of learning, wellness in learning, and also neuroscience of learning. And I want to touch a little bit first on the neuroscience of learning with a couple of things that are important insights in the way that we think about how understanding students' brains can truly elevate their performance. So when we talk a little bit about the learning brain, we can go back a little bit into the anatomy of the brain. And if we go back to the lizard brain, which kind of really was about survival and fight or flee, with the kind of the second brain being the mouse brain, which really was about understanding the memory and kind of the wider emotions, with the third brain being kind of the human brain, that we're being able to do much more complex thinking and problem solving. But I want to focus a little bit on the mouse brain, because when you look at that aspect and these kind of 3 key elements of that that mouse brain, the hypothalamus, the hippocampus, and the amygdala. But the amygdala is very interesting because scientists have found that when that amygdala is under stress, it cannot transfer input into the brain. So if the amygdala is this alarm system, it's kind of decoding emotion, it's processing memories, but under a stress, it shuts down. So anything that the ears are listening, that the eyes are seeing, that we are sensing overall, it doesn't transfer onto the various parts of the brain because that is shut down. It's like almost like a passageway. So the idea is, how do we relax the amygdala? How do we kind of create moments where the amygdala is relaxed so the students can actually learn and absorb everything that is done? Because what we also learn is that in this process of memorization, the various aspects of a learning experience are cataloged in the various parts of the brain. So visual input is cataloged in the visual association areas, sensorial are cataloged in the sensorial areas, and so on. So that when it's time to create connections, when I start to understand learning, it's because these various parts of the brain are touching. So the idea is that as a teacher and as an environment, as Judy Willis says in Ignite Learning, she's both a teacher and a neuroscientist. In the classroom, the more the ways the material is learned, the material to be learned is introduced to the brain and reviewed, the more dendrite pathways are created between those various parts of the brain. So that's what we're trying to do. So meaning, rather than hearing about a story of a car, it's understanding the car by being in it, by smelling it, by touching it, by driving it. That's how the brain kind of absorbs more components of that learning experience into a holistic kind of memorized experience. We also want to touch a little bit on the movement and the brain and the kind of the role of neuroplasticity and neurogeneration. There's a great document created by the US Department of Health and Human Services together with the CDC. It's called the Association Between School-Based Physical Activity, including physical education and academic performance. And within that, it touches on a lot of the well features that should be part of the learning spaces. They promote physical fitness, they promote mental health and education, they reduce air and noise pollution, and they engage teachers and kind of the larger community of students to optimize the student well-being and their academic performance. So that's what we're trying to do, is find ways and clues from the well kind of performance specifications to understand how a learning environment can do better for our students. Simultaneously, one of the leading neuroscientists in the world, Dr. Souza, as he touches on the mind, the brain, and the education, is that the typical classroom setting where students just sit and get was challenged by research findings showing that the brain is much more active when learners are moving around. So essentially, movement brings additional fuel carrying blood to the brain. So we want to encourage environments where students can move. How do we do that? That's a question for all practitioners, all teachers, and all designers of learning environments. How do we create environments that support this movement?
And it's so important because how this physical activity really does affect the brain, and it improves attention. It improves the processing and the storage and the retrieval. It helps us to cope. And I have a daughter who has ADHD, and I know that when she moves, she learns, and when she's stagnant, she doesn't. And so, you need to be able to meet the needs of all of the students that are in your space. And this activity really does have a dramatic impact on the ability for students to learn properly. And here's an example, you've all been sitting for a little while now, I'm sure, watching all these videos. And, when you start to watch them, you zone out and you start to get this lower brain activity. And so get up, walk around, move around, have the students move around, and you start to see that higher brain activity happen. And, when you look at this study here and this brain waves that they're looking at after walking, you can see that person's going to learn better.
There's also the idea of time and the brain and kind of the chronobiology and circadian rhythms in the wellness. And Benedict Carey, who wrote How We Learn, also had a great book on understanding how we learn. Our different brains learn differently, but that the brain is sensitive to mood and timing and circadian rhythms, as well as the location and environment. So all these various aspects of the learning experience do have an impact on the way we learn, and it's not the same for everybody. So this is a concept of understanding that maybe a more focused space is more important for me than it may be for you, or as a certain student works better in a place that is next to daylighting, while others do it better in a darker environment. It's important to understand. So that's something that we're trying to kind of reach in.
But as we start to look at design, one of the key things we're looking at is how do we get good circadian rhythm? And so when you look at your cell phones, now you have a setting where it takes out that blue at the night so you can sleep, but you also need that blue during the day to get alertness and to help set that circadian rhythm for the day, and so that you can sleep at night. And so we're starting to look at lighting design and how do we do lighting design in a building to help complement that circadian rhythm. And so another piece that's really important is the day lighting design. We used to look at building orientation, and we always wanted it to be north-south because to get light in the windows and then keep the shades open on the north side. And now we're looking at it not from an energy standpoint. We're really looking at it from a daylighting circadian rhythm standpoint and being able to keep the view. So you can see right here, we're doing daylighting studies on spaces so we can optimize the amount of daylight students are getting throughout that day.
There's also a lot of research that has been done about sleeping in the brain, and then kind of how that affects various students also in various ages where the students are. But when you look at the functions of sleep, it does clean the brains of toxins. It helps with physical restoration of the brain and the body. It informs. It becomes a processing of information and a memorization of information. It regulates our moods and it strengthens our immune system. So that impact of sleep is important, but it's also because short-term memories become long-term memories through sleep. So as we then look at the spaces and the idea of restorative space, we are being asked as students to be in pure attention for 50 minutes out of every hour, and then do that over a period of 6, 7, 8 hours. And students get direction attention fatigue. We do as well. We do need attention restoration. One of the best ways to do that is by obviously going to nature or having connections to nature. I'm going to touch on that in a second here. But I also wanted to touch on the book from Benedict Carey, and he touches on this important quote: is scientists have found that we work more effectively when we continuously alter our study routines and abandon any dedicated space in favor of varied locations. So it's basically asking us for our learning environments to support variety of spaces. And that this idea that every classroom, a cells and bells condition, where the furniture is the same, where the coloring is the same, it's just not the way that the brain reacts. The brain is seeking for newness every time, and for adjustability and changes in light patterns, in wall patterns, and so on. So this idea is pretty powerful.
And when we're looking at a space, we want to make sure that we can stay engaged, that we can hear what's going on, that we're getting rid of that HVAC background noise that might be preventing the teacher from really communicating with the students. Also, sound transmission. I remember going to a school that didn't have walls between classrooms. All we had was bookcases, and I couldn't hear the teacher in multiple classes. And I know it made it difficult for me to learn in those spaces. And so how we're approaching buildings and the student spaces from an acoustic standpoint is very important. And the other piece that is really critical is indoor air quality. And, this was really critical before the pandemic. Because increased ventilation does not just impact being able to get better air quality and getting contaminants out, but when you lower those CO2 levels, there has been evidence through studies done by Harvard on, reducing CO2 levels improves test scores. And so what we like to do in these projects is look at how a high performance building and how it impacts you from the standpoint of how do you get increased ventilation? How do you flush contaminants out of spaces? How do you improve the filtration? And UV lights to kill things that might potentially be in the air, bipolar ionization, humidity control. There's all kinds of strategies out there that are really important to improve indoor air quality. And it's gotten a lot of attention this last year, but it should have been getting attention a lot sooner.
Another aspect of wellness is the idea of nature, and or more importantly, nature deficit disorder. And the context is being able to understand how much access can students have to nature. We know that that calms us down, it reduces stress, it helps us with our mood. And so, not always can we be outside, although COVID is bringing a stronger emphasis on learning outside and being able to take the learning experience to the outdoors. And what are the opportunities as well to be able to engage with nature, even if we're inside? So in this case, for example, our project that we've created where the hallways are aligned with existing trees, right? So as you move up and down this hallway, those 5 minutes of transfer between classes, you're connecting to landscape, you're connecting to trees and kind of help reduce heart rate and reduce stress. And another aspect that we're really learning a lot about is the kind of idea of community and how important that is in supporting the well-being of students, of bringing inclusivity and respect, and kind of being able to work in teams. So this idea of allowing students to take ownership of their experience by collaborating, by presenting to each other, by being part of a larger group, and allowing furniture and spaces to support this kind of more collaborative work, being in circles and sitting around in the round, right? It's kind of where students see each other's faces and are able to understand potentially the struggles the students are dealing with. And again, it supports this idea of belonging and being part of a larger context, which is so important with school kids, especially elementary and middle.
And there's some really good resources out there that help give guidance on different guidelines to improve the wellness within a building. There's the ASHRAE guidelines that are out there for indoor air quality. We've got LEED that has credits for, low emitting materials and for, increased ventilation. And we've also got the WELL building standard, and that's a standard that was built specifically to focus on opportunities to improve the health and wellness in our buildings. And so these are all great resources. And in addition to being a resource to give you guidance, they also have within them references you can go to and read the studies that help support the decisions that you would be making to improve wellness in your buildings. And so now we're going to get into sustainability, resilience, and regenerative design. And we're going to start out with talking about high performance buildings and zero energy design. And we're going to go into the case study about NeoCity. And, this is just not a passing trend. We are seeing a real strong interest in improving energy efficiency. People believe that reducing energy helps our environment, and it does, because 40% of, I'll go to the next. Oh, sorry, jumped ahead. 40% of the energy usage that is being used out there is through buildings. And so if you start to think about the emissions that are from the buildings, they really need to be a strong focus as we look to improve our environment moving forward. And so on average, high performance schools, they literally use 65 to 80% less energy than a conventional building. And so that's not just about the energy, it's also a reduction in their carbon footprint, and it's also a reduction in their operating costs. And so it's just something that really makes sense for school districts to really be focusing on. So how do you do that? What is that process? And really the first thing that you need to do is really understand how much energy you're currently using. And so the metric that we use is EUI, it's energy use intensity. And it's basically a kBTU per square foot per year. And how you use that is you first do the audit of all your buildings. And once you do that audit, you get that baseline of where you're at. And so this process is, that you go and you do the discovery, look into your procedures, your policies, you analyze things, you get those workshops and goals. And I talk about discovery probably more than I would talk about any of the other things, because the first 30% of this project, the initial part, is where you're making all those good decisions, of those decisions to lower your utility costs, lower your carbon footprint. And so that is the most critical part of this process. And you just refine that and design that and implement that. And implementation is critical too, because if you make all these great decisions, if you don't follow through all the way to the end, it'll be a failure. Oh, Shoot. Okay, so so an energy use intensity, like I said earlier, is the kBTU per square foot per year. And basically that is everything that uses energy within a building, that consumption is put into a kBTU per square foot. And you divide that by the year and that equals an EUI. And so to become net zero, basically what you need to do is produce as much energy on site as you use. So if you're a 20 EUI usage, you're going to buy 20 EUI of solar panels. And so what we do when we start to study a high performance building is we really break that down. We break that EUI down. We look at how much is HVAC, how much is plug loads, you've got kitchen loads, you've got lighting, and you've got IT. And you take each of those pieces of the pie and you find ways to reduce the consumption of them. And so the lower the EUI, the better the project. And so it's kind of like a golf score. You're always looking to get as low as possible. And so with this project, we were looking at a national average is around 65 to 68 EUI. If we look at the district, Osceola County, they were at a 65 on average. Florida in general is at a 55, but our goal was a 20. And so we were looking to do drastic energy reduction. And so whenever you get to try to do a zero energy building, it's kind of funny because, you know, it's not just about the solar panels. You know, if you start to look at how many solar panels do you need, you could have a 65 EUI and you can buy a field of solar panels. You're not going to fit them on your roof. And so what it is be able to get that energy use as low as possible before you buy renewable energy. And so data really has to guide the decisions that you're making throughout the design process. And the first example we have is how we did a massing study. And so basically we looked at different options for massing and we looked what is the energy impact of those. But you can't just look at it from the standpoint of we have to get the lowest EUI because this is a place of learning. And so really you can't negate the purpose of the place. And so, you know, not necessarily do you need to pick the lowest EUI, but you need to make a conscious decision about what your decision would be. In this case, we ended up having the lowest EUI as our selected design, but it has to be set up within the prioritizations. And this is about data and tracking data. So after you build your building, it is really important to be able to see and understand how the building's performing, whether that's through dashboards, which are huge. The other piece is using your utility bills. So anybody can make a model and, you know, and it can say whatever you want it to say, really. But the key is being able to take that model and compare it to the actual utility use. And you can see, you know, are we performing where we need to be performing? And if we're not, why is that the case? And then you go and you do a forensic investigation and you go, oh my goodness, well, they're leaving this on here and they're over scheduling this. And, you know, there's different things that can happen. And so a big portion of it is using this data that you get through the occupancy to help understand not only how to make this building perform, but how to leverage that for future buildings. And I always love this Grace Hopper phrase. I use it all the time. The most dangerous phrase in the English language is we've always done it this way. And I can't tell you the number of times, you know, that we hear, I've always done it this way. And just because you've done it this way doesn't mean it's the right thing to be doing. And so we really need to work with people to, you know, have more of an open mind, to be thinking differently and challenge themselves to try new things. You know, in NeoCity, we use distributed heat pumps with a dedicated outdoor air system. Dedicated outdoor air systems have been around for over 20 years. Well, they started in the year 2010. So I guess it's been 11 years and heat pumps have been around forever. And so if you start to think about it, you're like, this is not new technology. It's just put together in a different way. And people haven't used it because they've always done what they've been doing since 1970 during the energy crisis when VAV was invented. And so it's really about getting people to think differently.
And there is this myth that it takes a lot longer to do a zero energy building, and that's absolutely not true. It does not take any longer. Actually, in this project that we shared, NeoCity, we were mandated to do the project in 6 months. This was a 45,000 square foot building, 3-story. So, and with a school district that had never done anything like this before. So obviously there was a lot of education through the process, but absolutely it can be done fast. As you can see here, from late December through early June, early July, we were able to accommodate all the process of creating this project. And again, it was a 10.5-month construction completion, so very, very tight schedule to do a zero energy building. It's also not, we also always talk that it's complex, but it's not complicated. You know, when we look at the building, it's really about understanding why there is energy loss and understanding that minimizing air leakage and right sizing the mechanical system, this kind of dual strategy brings the kind of the key metric of reducing that energy footprint, that EUI that we were touching on earlier. So really kind of paying huge attention to minimizing air leakage. You do that through careful detailing, and it's not mysticism. I mean, we can demystify, we can go step by step, and that's what we've done. We identify how to make this happen through sequencing and share that with subcontractors so that the detailing is created to minimize air leakage and support this really strong concept of high performance. And design is only 50% of the process, right? I mean, we can design all we want, but we have to implement it correctly. We have to verify, and that's kind of the importance of commissioning. But you know, we always have the biggest issue with making it fit. It's always wants that cavity between ceiling and floor always wants to be as small as it can be. But we simulate all these systems in that BIM model and make sure that it works and that it will work as we move through. But the idea too is that we do need to create this idea of detailing. And as you can see here, there are 6 very simple steps that were shared with the subcontractor in order to be able to get to the point where these joints, where materials come together, they don't leak air. So we're not pumping the building with cold air and it kind of leaks right out. It kind of stays within the building. So it's very efficient. So the idea is to trust our contractors and subcontractors, but also verify. And you know, we did that through a QA/QC process where everyone on the job has a responsibility to making sure that the air infiltration is minimized. So again, back to this checklist of points, starting from the exterior of the joint, in this case was a tilt-up process, and then going in from the inside as well, and kind of arriving to a place where infiltration is minimized. And part of that is that mock-ups are non-negotiable. They have to be a key component of the construction process, and they have to be tested. In this process, we learn a lot, and there was a target of 0.25 CFM. But when we tested, and part of this project was obviously mostly tilt-up, but part of the project had an EIFS component, an EIFS wall section, and they had screwed the insulation to the studs behind. During testing, it was very evident that through those screws, all kinds of air leakage was occurring. So it was restated to them that the specs were calling for adhered insulation to the sheathing, not screw through. And after that, the infiltration was way minimized. So again, part of testing, part of creating mock-ups and really doing that through this kind of blow testing.
So as we look at these results, I'm a mechanical engineer, so I design HVAC systems. And the reason that this results that we got for low air leakage is because that way we can right size the HVAC system. And one of the biggest fears you see in our industry is fear of infiltration. And so, you know, people will round off and then round up, and then they're like, yeeks, we might have infiltration. And so you just start to size things larger and larger. And so a lot of times you can reduce your HVAC equipment up to 30%. And when you reduce the capacity up to 30%, you can afford other strategies because you don't have to buy as much tonnage. You don't have to buy as much heating. And all of that is dependent on confidence in that envelope. So when you have a method where you're out there testing and you've got a mock-up and you're getting results on your building envelope and removing infiltration, you have that confidence to be able to downsize that equipment, which is huge. The other piece is, you know, a lot of places, infiltration is not the air we want brought into the building. We want to bring in clean air that's been filtered, that's been dehumidified to our spaces. And so we want to control how that space is ventilated, and eliminating this infiltration is the best way to do that. And so we want to look at, what is the finances on it? I told you earlier, I have an MBA. Well, a lot of projects you're looking at, the costs here are not prohibitive, but you have to look at all your decisions to make sure that you can get there within your existing budgets. And, so what we do is we look at, how much money are we spending on energy? Well, $8 billion is being spent on energy. And in this district alone, they're spending $12 million. So if we can reduce that number 65 to 80%, it's going to have a huge impact on their ability to make better choices and different choices for the students in their district. And so it's really, a lot of these projects, we were very easily able to, get funded within the existing project budget. We're not going out and asking for budgets to be increased. What we're doing is asking people to think differently, not do something the way they've always done it, and also do a lot of study up front so that we're making really good decisions throughout that design process to be able to spend money where we need to be spending money.
But there was a great resource, but the World Green Building Council kind of created the case for the business case for green building, and some of this was obviously oriented towards office buildings and tenant buildings, but the second item on the list, the decrease in operation costs, is very real, and that's where we are arguing here that where increased ROI or increased building value may not be the driving factor for green buildings in schools and school districts. Decreasing operating costs is, and we understand that when you are not paying for utilities, but you are instead giving that money towards technology, better teacher pay, and better student experience, you can really get the return on the investment in that manner. And yeah, energy savings in green buildings typically exceed any design cost and construction cost premiums within a reasonable payback. And that's kind of our argument, is that needs to be explored, and that should be explored in any project that you do. Look and ask for payback period on any potential investment to, number one, reduce the EUI, so creating a high performance building, and number two, what do we do with active strategies like solar PV or geothermal to bring it down to potentially zero energy.
So something we want to touch on is, after the building is built, it is so important to really focus on the commissioning effort. I was the commissioning agent of the first K-12 education building in the country over a decade ago. And I will tell you, during that process, I located many things that if they weren't running the way they were designed to run, we would have never achieved that goal. And, NeoCity is the same situation. Is, if we don't get things operating properly and do a robust commissioning process, we're not going to get to our EUI goal. So that definitely needs to be something that is a focus of the startup of the building.
And, a huge part of success is really having an internal champion. And the project that we're going to discuss in a second here is a case study in NeoCity Academy in Osceola, the school district of Osceola County in Central Florida. Mark Clinch, the head of facilities in the district, was the champion. He's an ex-Navy with a true understanding of when you plan ahead, you can achieve your goals. So set a strong plan in place and push it. He'd never done a zero energy building before, or a high performance building for that matter, but he was adamant about pursuing this strategy and seeing where it would lead to. And so this idea of having a strong leader and a champion is kind of based on these two viewpoints, right? One, on the left side, is kind of looking at it in terms of obstacles, budgetary constraints and cost cutting. Can't do it that way, or there's too many high upfront costs for improvements. Can't do it. or that there is a lack of my leadership team to buy in, and the staff knowledge and support it doesn't exist. But there's also a second view, is you set up goals. There's resource savings, and meaning that there is more funds for instruction and school operations if we spend less money on utilities. That there is an implementation approaches that minimize risk and put improvements within reach, right? And the more you do this, the more you know how to do the next one. And that these wins really do support a stronger district and kind of this idea of institutional kind of excellence that now is being put to the forefront, right? In terms of just not energy, but wellness to our kids as they go into school and make sure that they're safe. So lots of important kind of aspects to that. And another one too, tools like Tally, for example, but there are others in the market, but they're the results of a life cycle kind of staging and kind of investigation, taking every single material that goes into this project and look at the life cycle cost. And is that the best way of spending district's money, or are there better ways of doing so? From maintenance of a point of view to a first cost point of view, but kind of itemizing and singling out every single element to understand where those savings could happen. And we also wanted to highlight that, yes, there is the sexiness of zero energy and the solar panels, but less than 0.25% of the savings on our high performance buildings come from solar panels. It's really about the high performance building design. It's about reducing air infiltration. It's about creating kind of crafty daylighting strategies that support this idea of savings per year. And when we look at analysis and assessment, Mark Lynch, there's a video on YouTube, you can see it, but it's really about these kind of questions that come up, right? Many of you have schools that are getting older. They're getting to 50 years old or so, and is the cost of replacement versus the cost of renovation on the table? This is difficulty in justifying removal of a building under 50 years old, but there may be a case to be done. So this kind of investigative approach to understanding your facilities, what is your current EUI, how much can you save on the next 10, 15, 20 years? That may actually be interesting to rethink how it's all done. And that's kind of where this is headed, right? Where we start looking at all these tangents of the process. But also there are these demands by taxpayers now and parents to create healthy facilities. Is this the right timing to rethink your mechanical systems and your approach to heating and cooling environments, learning environments? And also the savings approach. We touch on that. We're going to give you a case study now that touches on the savings of high performance of buildings. And if it's done in a careful manner, we're convinced that there is multiple ways in which you can create a timeline where there is a return on investment of about 4, 6, 10 years, maybe a max, to recoup the money invested and really save on this year in these buildings that are 50-year buildings.
And with all of these older buildings, there's a lot of buildings out there with poor air quality. And part of the CARES Act really gives an opportunity to potentially address that. And we're working with some clients, and there's synergy behind high performance and bringing ventilation in through the dedicated outside air system with energy recovery. So you can get those, maybe there's some funding mechanisms that you can find to really bring some high performance metrics to your school that are a little more out of the box.
So we'd like to get to then the fourth chapter of this presentation, which is really about this, what we call the master move. It's kind of how do we bring all these aspects of a new way of thinking to a case study that we'll share with you. So again, back to this diagram, right? I mean, we started with this, we kind of ended with this, but when is a great well environment, a high performing environment, and one that takes into account ROI, this kind of perfect example of a learning experience for all that really takes into account all the aspects of bringing a learning environment into practice. So for this project, the NeoCity Academy was really about understanding the vision. And when we talked to the district and they kind of gave us this brief, that NeoCity Academy was an inquiry-driven, project-based STEM choice program, a kind of a magnet program, where they would develop students who believe the world can be a better place and that they can be the ones that can make that happen. It's a lofty goal, and it was very interesting to have dialogues, early visioning dialogues with the client to understand that this goal was going to happen. They were really adamant that this would impact the design of the facilities and the protocols and the processes by which these students come to this school every day and what they do inside of it. So after the visioning, as you can see here, there were 15 drivers. Each one of them were better than the next. But when it was time to prioritize, the top two became the true drivers for the project. First was creating an immersive learning experience where collaboration and 21st century skills and active learning was prevalent through the facility, and you could literally see it happening. And second, that it was a high performance building facility. They were targeting savings, so they could invest in the teaching and learning rather than on the utilities. Other than that, there were all kinds of other goals and objectives, but those two became the most important to the school district. Part of that, as we talked about, the champion was ex-Navy, and they have this saying in the Navy, plan the work your plan. So it was a very powerful master schedule that we created in order to be able to achieve this process in 6 months, and a construction schedule of 10 and a half months. And we kind of broke that down in terms of a master schedule, a zero energy schedule, and risk mitigation, QA, QC scheduling, with all this kind of benchmarking and landmark moments through the process where input was extremely important and where decision-making had to be made in order to maintain that kind of process. I want to touch a little bit on programming of the project. The first phase, which is a building we're going to show you, was about 45,000 square feet, 500 students, 25-to-1 ratio, about 125 kids per grade, really focused, and this again is a high school, focus on 3 key tracks, engineering, biomedical engineering, and cybersecurity. The goal was that there would be an addition, a future middle school adjacent to it, so it would be a feeder school to the high school with the same kind of understanding and same kind of goals and objectives, but obviously for middle schoolers. Yet, every time you try to innovate and do something different, as you can see in the design drivers, we get stuck with ed specs. And in Florida, they're extremely stringent in the way that we can accomplish innovation. So if you were to look at state requirements for educational facilities in Florida, and the latest of those is from the 2014, so we're almost talking a decade. We're
doing what we always do, right, Thomas?
Exactly. Exactly. So we're asking kids to be innovative with ed specs that relate to 2014, a decade ago, right? So we had to be extremely careful about how we design the spaces and label the spaces so that they would be kind of approved by Florida ed specs, but at the same time, it would be innovative enough for the kinds of things they wanted to do inside of the facility. So we were able to highlight certain amount of spaces that were recommending the amount of occupants, how many teacher stations they would have, and kind of the net square footage per occupant mandates, but kind of find through these kind of carefully line items, basically, of understanding that we could design for different types of spaces by utilizing still the rules, but utilizing them to our thinking of how we wanted the space to work. So obviously the learning, when we looked at, this is what they gave us, and sorry for maybe the small type and stuff, but this was a rough document, and this was the curriculum framework. And when you start really reading through this, you start to understand that they're talking about advancing the learning experience. They need to do oral progress. They need to be collaborative. They need to work in teams. They need to be design thinkers. And all this language was not compatible with their ed specs, to be honest. And when you look at the curriculum framework and the kind of language they were using in terms of being responsible, being academic and technically skilled, being communicative, have empathy, being creative and innovative, understanding how to do research strategies. I mean, all these words were really, really hard for them to understand how that would happen in a cells and bells kind of situation. So these design drivers for the learning aspect of it became these kind of 12 key elements, right? Cross-disciplinary, design thinkers, self-driven, the teamwork was part of it, that mentorship was strong, the one-on-one meetings would happen any moment, that students could work in a class or outside of the class, and they have the power to move through the learning environments, and that it was very, very much about a process experience. This kind of, after a careful look at programming, we ended up here where we were meeting the SREF requirements for grossing and net square footage, where we were accommodating the amount of students that were needed for the capacity, and that the square footage grossing factor was different, was the same as all the school districts, but all the schools in the district, but at the same time, when you look at the planning, was extremely different. I want to touch, before I get into the planning, I want to touch a little bit on site and analysis and design, because we were also mandated for the building to be a part of a new urbanist kind of master plan. It's called Neo City, just south of Orlando, where all these buildings will be high tech. It will be almost like a high tech corridor. Students in this high school, which will be located in the red trapezoidal shape, would spend half of the day in school and half of the day as interns in the various industries, ranging from high tech to nanotechnology to other high technology kind of industries. So again, they were trying to make the students be a part of their kind of immediate context. So in terms of the diagram, we really looked at it in terms of a module, where students within this module were free to move around, were free to choose their environment, where collaboration happened not just between students, but between teachers. And this module became almost this kind of core for each of these three kind of main pathways, the cybersecurity, bioengineering, and engineering. And then obviously is the way that we would locate these modules within the site. Again, 60% of the building had to be oriented to Neo City Boulevard, this kind of southeast to northwest kind of street, and it wasn't optimal for solar orientation. So as you start to see on some of these diagrams, is how we start to crank some of these modules so that they're facing true south rather than facing southwest, which is really not the optimal orientation in a Florida landscape. So number two, the one in the top middle, became almost the preferred method. So it opened up to having views to these kind of courtyards on the kind of the northwest, having wings that kind of created that courtyard, strong visibility to nature in all ways. And that kind of green zone became the kind of the hearth, became the place where students can take an online course with a community college or a college as well, as much as they can take an independent study course. So the idea was mobility, the idea is independence and autonomy, and that's kind of what you see. So here we're going to show you some images. This is Neo City, STEM Academy, first zero energy school in Florida, first immersive learning school in Florida. And as you can see, the school had about a 17,000 square foot roof, multiple levels, including the canopies. And that became, we kind of came in with a 20 EUI, and the solar PVs kind of offset that 20. And we were inspired by these kind of ideas, photonics and nanocarbon strands and kind of biomimicry and the circuitry of boards, and which are the industries of those businesses that are going to be around Neo City Academy in the coming years. So we're kind of looking at the skin, being inspired by that. Again, it's a tilt-up project. It's a very simple construction, very typical to Central Florida, very typical to all central school districts, but it doesn't have to look that way. And through careful design, we're able to kind of make it a little more fun, bring color into it. And then on the southern ends, we created environments that were, number one, canopies for solar, but also shaded the kind of the dining experience while shading also south-facing windows. And this idea of harvesting daylighting was extremely important. And many of the images you'll see of the interiors really do highlight incredible daylighting strategies through screening, or even Caldwell, as you can see on the lower image, where we brought in strong daylighting into from the top without kind of bringing the direct light into into interiors of the spaces. And as you can see here, a 3-story, this mixer, this zone in green, which became the kind of the hearth where it really truly allowed students to work collaboratively or independently if they wanted to. And then kind of a strong idea of these kind of modules that became connected with independent study spaces, small team spaces, as you can see there. So again, this was about this 21st century immersive learning, spaces that support, and it has a new curriculum that they were designing for this space. And that supported these concepts of mobility, wellness, autonomy of students, agency, collaboration, research strategies, project-based learning, idea of mentorship, one-on-one with teachers, and also interpersonal skills. And as you can see, this was based, the design was based on the immersive learning scape, this kind of concept where typologies of learning spaces support typologies of learning processes. And so we have areas like ThinkSpace, as you can see an image on the top left, where students can work by themselves or with other students with whiteboards, so they can take notes as they do research, and they can have a Zoom call if they're very advanced or they're trying to catch up. Discover spaces, you can see in a tan in kind of the middle, but where we open up 3 huge labs into an environment where teachers are working in cross-disciplinary ways. And also the impart spaces, tier spaces where all students can see and hear. They're acoustically well created environments. But as you can see on this image on the bottom left, students are teaching each other. They're working in teams and they're using whiteboards as kind of their kind of collaborative space, workspace. And it's a very intimate space for them, yet it's transparent and you can see into the hallways. And the idea of create spaces, whether you're looking at the bottom right or top right, various areas where students can work in teams collaboratively, where technology supports that teamwork. Sometimes the technology is mobile, sometimes it's not. But also exchange, which is a central core, where students kind of is much more of a flex kind of anytime, anywhere kind of environment, and students take full ownership of it, as you will see in some of the other images. So just to kind of highlight some of these images, you see ThinkSpace, again, full of daylighting. Students can take ownership of their space. Co-create team spaces, this kind of robotics labs, open to physics labs, maker labs. But as you can see behind on the green wall, there are kind of smaller team spaces. So students can go iteratively from working on a small team to working by themselves to working with teachers and other students on a hands-on kind of environment. Or you can see here, students kind of having whiteboards and technology and furniture that is really supporting collaboration and a collaborative approach. Or where students can actually pull into a room and work as a team. And this is encouraged in the school, it's encouraged in the processes, and students are great about how they collaborate. Again, these are the kids that are going to go into a collaborative work environment, so they might as well practice this skills day in, day out, as you can see here. And maker labs, obviously you start to see the technologies and the kind of the power, but also their teams working in these glass rooms. So teachers can have an overseeing kind of looking at them, but at the same time they have their privacy to work on their projects. And they, again, that experience, the learning experience changes from working by yourself to working on teams to working on larger kind of setups of maybe more passive listening in certain times of the day, as this kind of is, right? I mean, you touch on this image, but it's pretty powerful to be connected to the rest of the school, but even students that are working around this impart space and walking through it can see what the students are doing, and again, have a kind of a dual kind of culture of learning, as you will. And then as you can see in this exchange space where students are working socially, they're in a more kind of relaxed environment. It's almost like a college environment. And what's surprising is that during COVID, this was the school which was most utilized in the whole district. Starting in August, the school was utilized 82% of the time by students. So 82% capacity of the school. And they were asking a lot of parents and students, why are you coming to school? And they said, because this feels like a college environment. We love being here, and it's a healthy environment. And Tracy can touch on that a little bit too.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these places that, that they can go and they can have good daylighting. It supports their circadian rhythm. It has good air quality. There's so many attributes that just make them feel good in that space. And when you feel good, you can do great things.
As you can see on these images, these are from their Instagram account. I encourage you all to look at it in Neo City Academy on Instagram, but they're constantly posting the kinds of things that they do, the kinds of guests that they have. As you can see on the bottom right, they connect with NASA, they connect with various businesses, they get inspired by professions, and but they play chess. They're kids. I mean, they're doing incredible things, and this is the future geniuses of America. Many of them will be coming from Neo City Academy for sure. So we want to kind of end the presentation a little bit with some results. The project was on budget and on time. The final construction was 13.2 million. Well within the cost per student station mandated by the state of Florida. So again, we did a zero energy project within the state budget mandated. So $294 a square foot, more or less. The time to realize the return on investment, so the ROI in this project was about 9.5 years, with the investment being 9.3 years. Again, we're talking about a 50 minimum year building. So within 10 years, this building will be paying for itself.
Well, and one of the key things to note here, Tomas, is that, the solar array was about $500,000. But if this were a typical school using a typical amount of energy, it would be $1.5 million. And it would no longer have been an affordable option for anyone to even consider.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you. Great. So differentiation, number one, ROI on high performance features. That was 4.5 years, or 4.4% of the budget, $593,000. To go on to the solar canopies, that was another kind of $500,000 plus, and that return was 8 years. So again, we can do one versus the other. We don't have to do both. Because again, we want to come back to this diagram. 77% of these savings really come from the high performance features, not necessarily from the solar PV, as Tracy was touching on earlier. So it's very important to think of that as we and as you start to design future buildings or renovate existing buildings that you have within your districts.
And the solar canopy that's here that we put both rooftop, which is by far the most affordable, but we were not able to fit everything on the roof because it is a 3-story structure. So we did have some canopies that we weaved in there, and it's got about 10% additional capacity than we anticipated we would need.
And we as architects are pushing for the 2030 challenge and supporting the AIA framework for design excellence. As you can see on this diagram, there were all kinds of strategies we don't have time to get in through, but many of them were highly supportive of this high performance kind of learning experience. And when we mandated through the specs to have a required rate of 0.15 CFM for air leakage, but when it was tested at 0.27, that's 81% better, which again, a huge aspect of designing for zero energy and high performance. Again, as we touched on, 5.5% investment for the high performance features. That's an ROI of 4.5 years. And for the full zero energy building performance, about 9.3% of budget went towards that, with a return on investment of 8 years time frame. So again, life cycle, they're saving about $115,000 per year. They'll save 3.2 over 20 years. And again, that money saved will go towards students, towards teachers, towards technology. As technology changes, they'll be able to adapt to that. And again, this was for about 500 students, but for a capacity of 625 students. Magnet High School of 44,500. And with that, we'll terminate it. We're exactly on time. We truly appreciate you sharing this hour with us. And if for whatever reason you have any questions whatsoever, please reach out to Tracy at CMTA or me at Little, and we'll be more than happy to to talk to you, share thoughts, ideas, and hopefully you want to follow the conversation with us in the future. Truly appreciate it. And again, this concludes our presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.